A lot of ultimates have been buffed and nerfed recently, and with Venture we've got a whole new one, Tectonic Shock. There are a lot of ways an ultimate can be good. Instant kill value, high level sustain, and zoning are a few, but it also matters how long they take to charge. So with that, let's get into the ultimate tier list for Season 10. If you're looking to rank up on your favorite heroes, check out the link in the description below to get access to a GameLeap membership. There are tons of guides and courses that can level up your game and help you get better, faster. Make sure to check it out and enjoy the video. Starting at F tier with Bastion's Artillery Strike. It can get pretty good zoning and has a potential to instantly kill, but it's massively inconsistent, and its duration is only 8 seconds. At that point, it's just a cooldown to be waited out, compared to an ultimate that demands respect. It's also one of the higher costing ultimates, which makes sense for how strong Bastion's neutral is, but as an ult on its own, it's way too easy to dodge or block for 90% of the hero roster. Moving up to D tier, first up is Riptire. It's the ult that got the worst deal out of the Season 9 changes, and a whole 2 months later, it still hasn't gotten better. It really needs 10 or 15 more HP at the least, but even so, it does last for up to 10 seconds, and even if it's easy to kill, it still has to be killed. It's a lot better on maps with high skyboxes that allow you to snake it around the rooftops, but you can't always rely on that, making it situational at best. Another tier up to C tier is fittingly Junk's best friend Roadhog with his aptly named ultimate, Whole Hog. It technically fits in with the rest of the tank ultimates. It definitely disrupts the enemy team with how much knockback it deals, but there aren't many situations you can get the full value out of it. He can heal and hook during it, but while he's firing, he's just regular old Roadhog with no armor and a massive hitbox. You can easily die during it because you'll be taking the same damage as normal. You're just pushing players back and hopefully far enough that they can't confirm the kill on you. Next up is Widowmaker's Infrasight, and it's a pretty tough ultimate to rate, but overall it's just too situational despite wall hacks being so powerful. 15 seconds is a long time, but it's only useful as a preventative ultimate. During the fight when things are happening, it's usually not as useful, and even so it can be pretty easily kited since it's just an information ability. It helps Widowmaker a lot, but when it comes down to the big ultimate fights, it just doesn't add enough value to the team. Moving on to Cassidy with his Deadeye/High Noon. It can get kills really fast, but it's usually easy to escape or block the damage, but that's good zoning at the very least. And at the end of the ultimate, the damage ramps up super fast, so anyone trying to get back in the fight too early can be easily punished. But it's as slow as it's always been, and you've got to trust your tank to protect you, because even though you've got 40% damage resistance the whole way through, you're not immune to a ton of headshots, nor to all the stuns in the game. Next is D.Va's Self-Destruct. It's a second life, but not all the time. There are a lot of tanks that can block the explosion and kill you before you can get back in your mech, but there are also a lot of tanks that can't. Although D.Va's neutral is strong, she could really use a little bit more in her ultimate. Your enemies always have 3 seconds to get behind cover, which can be really useful for taking space, but because you're no longer a tank for that duration, it's hard to keep up the pressure. Not bad, but not good either. On to Soldier's Tactical Visor. It's pretty decent given the 0 fall-off damage, but it's very rare that you can confirm kills at that range, since it's really easy to dip out of your far-off sightlines. For a damage ult on one of the most consistent heroes, it's pretty underwhelming. Aimbot is great, but you still need a good setup. At that point, the ultimate may give you more steady damage, but it also announces that the enemy team where you are. Not ideal for getting quick picks or taking good space. Moving on to Dragon Strike. Hanzo's dragons are a lot more good than bad, but there's still a limit to how much they can do. It's really best used to break defensive holds, but nowadays there aren't as many teams stacked on top of each other to get big damage value. The best you can do otherwise is split off the backline. Decent value, but nothing too crazy. Halfway through C tier we've got Bob. Just as a 1200 HP turret, he's pretty lackluster, but with his uppercut on direct hits, he becomes extremely impactful. It's pretty much an insta-kill setup on anyone it hits, even on some tanks. It's not very consistent to hit, but it makes up for his mediocre turret value. And even so, you have to block him or kill him, wasting resources while Ashe keeps farming. Now for Minefield, which has gotten a lot better now that it's buffed to 60 health per mine. It takes just that much longer to clear, making it one of the best zoning abilities in the game. Placed on the objective, it's insanely powerful, but even so, it doesn't force the enemy team to do much. You can still break the mines, even if they're a little tankier, so unless you catch all 5 members inside of it, there are plenty of options to deal with it. Next is a more reliable zoning option, Torbjorn's Molten Core. The damage per second it does was already so good before Season 9 that it didn't need a maintenance buff, and it has the added benefit of not being removable once it's placed. It is only limited to zoning, but Overwatch is all about the objective, so making the point to complete Death Zone is always valuable. It's just manageable outside of overtime. Now for the first support ultimate on the list, and it's expectedly Mercy's Valkyrie. She's much harder to kill and keeps her team alive and aggressive pretty well, but it's a jack of all trades type ultimate. It doesn't do anything exceptionally, but it definitely stabilizes your team. Damage boosting multiple members of your team is pretty effective, but even when it's not compared to other support ultimates, it's just not enough. Now for B tier, the biggest tier by far. First up is Zarya's Graviton Surge. You would think that catching a big grav would always convert into a teamfight win, but it doesn't. And it takes a long time to charge, combined with being a projectile that can be eaten or blocked. And just the fact that it can be blocked by shields is pretty rough. That all sounds bad, but the payoff always has high potential, and just the threat of the ult alone can be good enough, but it's definitely the worst out of the better ultimates in the game. Next is Captive Sun, which is pretty similar to Graviton in that it's a single shot projectile, but Iliari has the benefit of gaining flight and applying a status effect that lingers for 6 seconds, and can obviously blow up for a ton of damage. But it's even easier to block than Grav. With With a slower projectile speed and a small charge-up time, it's only slightly better, but by such a small margin that it almost doesn't count. Now we're getting to the more instant value ultimates, starting with Reaper's Death Blossom. It fits right in with his kit and can be used both from the flank or straight from the front line jumping into the enemy. The immense damage combined with his lifesteal make it a great brawling ultimate, but it's still very easily blocked. It does decent damage against shields as long as there are multiple players behind it, but without the element of surprise or a massive team-wide push behind it, there's a lot of ways to survive, and mitigating all the damage makes Reaper a lot more killable. It requires a good setup, but when it works well. Next we've got Meteor Strike. It also fits really well into Doom's other abilities, but it takes just a bit too long to build, and of course it's easily blocked. The good thing is that the full 40% slow effect applies even at the minimum 50 damage, so even when enemies dodge the center of the strike, it still has a lasting impact. But Doomfist takes a lot of damage on landing despite the overhealth gain it gets. It is an instant escape, which is amazingly valuable for a tank, but in order to farm it enough you have to be spamming engages, which isn't always safe to do. Just one spot ahead of Doom is his nemesis Orisa, and although her ultimate has gotten better, it sometimes feels like it can only bait abilities instead of setting up or confirming kills, or drastically turning the fight in your favor. The effects of the ultimate are great, pulling in heroes, applying Fortify, a slight slow, and a decent damage burst. But with Kiriko and Lucio being so popular, it's not even guaranteed to force more than one ability. It's a good ultimate for sure when it hits, but out of the better ults in the game, it's easier to predict and also easy to punish. She may be in Fortify, but she is standing perfectly still for everyone to do max damage to her. Now it's time for the newest ult of the game, Venture's Tectonic Shock. It's a decent damage ultimate with 4 shots dealing 130 damage each, so I can't help but compare it to Overclock. It has less potential damage, but it can hit multiple targets with each shockwave and is easier to hit, at the cost of being confined to the ground. There's a pretty fine balance between the pros and cons, so it's definitely a B tier ultimate. But with how good Venture is at setting up, you can always get explosive value with it that immediately threatens backline heroes with a pick. Next up is a slightly better Earthquake ability, Reinhardt's Earth Shatter, and it just recently got buffed, making it decidedly better with increased range and stun duration. One shot is all you need, and Rein becomes way more threatening with it compared to his normal neutral. Most other tanks have an easy time baiting and blocking it though, so it's a bit too situational, and again it's confined to the ground. It can go up slopes, but there are a lot of heroes in the game that just aren't threatened by it at all. Next is one of those heroes with Pharah's Barrage, which is the ultimate burst damage ultimate. It's also one of the only ultimates that can be blocked by shields that can still just break right through them. Combined with her new mobility, she can set up some really devastating one-shots. It's definitely an ultimate based on surprise though, so there's limits to how much it can do. Using it in the front line, for example, will deal a lot of damage but can lead to you getting killed for it. Closing in on the halfway point of B tier, it's Ramatcha's Annihilation. As a straight upgrade to Nemesis form, it's a decent ultimate that can be hard to counter. You'll have to time it right though, because you still have all the weaknesses of Nemesis form. It can be blocked by shields, but naturally Ramatcha punches right through them. It's pretty easy to pressure the enemy team enough before the fight so that it doesn't become an issue later. Next we've got Dragon Blade. It's a very strong transformation, but it's not an instant win. It definitely adds a lot to the fight though, and combined with dash resets can be really difficult to deal with. With a faster fire rate, it's got even more burst than before, and it's one of the ultimates that always gets support. Pocketing Genji or buffing him in any way skyrockets the potential of the blade, even if it's not always easy to set up. Rampage is next, and it can be stunned, cleansed, or tanked, but it's still an anti-healing effect. There's only 2 sources in the game, and Queen has massive potential with each ultimate. It's pretty much the definition of a hit or miss ultimate, but you can play around the threat of anti-healing a whole team. Forcing abilities beforehand is also one of Queen's specialties, so it definitely deserves its spot in the upper half of B tier. Moving on to Blizzard, that's still just as much of a threat despite the new ways to beat it in Overwatch 2. It still has a pretty massive area of effect, so as long as it does go off, it can split the entire fight in half, which Mei can already do really well with her Ice Wall. It's definitely not a good time for the ultimate right now though, with Fortify and Suzu and Life Grip and just plain old speed boost, but it's not a bad ultimate just by being countered by some of the best abilities in the game. Things are ramping up as the next ultimate in B tier is Rally. Every part of it has great value in the current state of the game. The stun, extra armor, and overhealth gain are all great, and the 750 shield health is especially useful in spam mirrors where Break can sometimes feel out of place. The only weakness is that Break doesn't heal herself more, but it might be a necessary disadvantage. With 150 total armor, she could be pretty crazy if she had more than the base 15 self heal per second from Inspire. Next is the new best overhealth ultimate, Life Weaver's Tree of Life. After the raw increase in healing, it's well over the threshold of an uncounterable support ultimate. More healing means more overhealth sooner, ramping up the value of the ultimate really fast. The range and health of the tree combined with the instant health burst make it really useful in a lot of situations, and although it's a lot harder to force aggressively, you can bait the enemy team into a position that you can then fortify with your tree. Now for every ult in one, it's Echo's duplicate, but the value you can get obviously depends on the enemy team's heroes. It's actually more than just a copy of the ultimate because you can play extra aggressive with it because you'll have your flight ready to dash out after your duplicate breaks. It makes Tracer duplicate a lot stronger, for example, because you can just fully commit to the stick without fear of dying instantly. It's a lot more consistent than other transformation ultimates, but you're pretty vulnerable at the start and end of the ult. so you still need a good setup and then good follow-up to actually get your copied ultimate before dying. Next up is Winston's Primal Rage, another big hit or miss ultimate, but it's a lot easier to get hits when you realize you don't have to be getting kills or crazy juggles. It's a massively disruptive ultimate, but with such a big hitbox it can be easy to get forced out for most of its duration. But a 2-second leap cooldown does let you do so much, it's just not very straightforward most of the time. We've got another tank ultimate next, Sigma's Gravitic Flux. It's insanely powerful with a massive area of effect and what's basically a root into a massive burst of damage, but it's still in B tier because even with the massive AoE, you can usually get only 2 heroes caught in it. So many heroes have an easy escape, and right now there are even a lot of ways to cancel the Flux. It's the highest level ultimate that can still be easily cancelled, but with nothing in its way, it's definitely devastating. Onto an ultimate that is nowhere near easily cancelled, it's Moira's Coalescence. It's even gotten better this patch at the cost of a slight DPS decrease in Moira's neutral, but it's safe to say that you won't die during the ultimate and can get the full value of the 30-meter healing and dealing. Moira's not known for her utility, but piercing barriers and matrix abilities is enough of an aggressive advantage. It's good healing and decent damage, but it can be kited and survived, but it's still not an ultimate you want to be fighting into. For the top 3 in B tier, first we've got Tracer's Pulse Bomb. It got a pretty hefty size decrease by 0.1 meters radius, but it's still 25% bigger than it was before Season 9. There was a good while where it was much easier to stick, but that's not what made it so good in the entire history of the game before that. It charges quickly, deals massive burst damage, and is really easy to throw out. It's an iconic B tier ultimate. Hitting the skill shot is really impactful, but it can often be traded for a single ability. Not too bad for Tracer's quick charge rate, but because it's almost as hard to stick as before, it's both inconsistent and peelable. Another quickly charging ultimate in the second B tier spot is Amplification Matrix, but it's a lot better for an instant advantage or recovery from a bad situation. Just the fact that it doubles heals and damage makes it really flexible, and it's pretty hard to counter if you're not ready for it. The double damage ramps up fast and makes even some of the weakest heroes in the game incredibly dangerous. It's a stationary ultimate that doesn't work everywhere, but it's got a decent duration and a near instant cast, which is top tier for a quickly charging support ultimate. And for the best in B tier, it's Bab's old buddy Mauga. Cage fight can feel pretty unstoppable, but it's mostly held back by how long it takes to charge. And without the infinite ammo, Mauga doesn't have as much follow-up after the ultimate ends. It's really strong against mobile heroes, but with just a bit of concentrated fire, the shield can break quickly. Another classic hit or miss ultimate, but even just the minimum value of the ultimate can be a free pick. Now for A tier, which is actually mostly damage ults. But first we've got Zenyatta's Transcendence. 6 seconds of invincibility for Zen himself is already great. It's easy to downplay the ultimate when you think of how anti-healing shuts it down, but with only Queen and Ana able to do so, most of the time you're pretty freely healing for those 6 seconds. And your Discord and Harmony can still be up for that whole time, turning yourself into a team-wide buff with the sole intent of hunting down that one discorded target. Season 9's health changes reduce the amount of one-shots, so even with a DPS passive, it's a lot easier to keep everyone alive and fighting. Now onto Sombra's EMP. The only drawback is that it doesn't charge exceptionally fast. It's pretty decent, but it's a teamwork-based ultimate. Even so, the effect is so strong that there's not much any team can do if enough heroes are caught in the blast. 3 seconds without your abilities is a long time, and with Sombra's increased virus burst, there's a lot of follow-up she can do herself if your teammates can't be trusted. Number 3 in A tier is Overclock. Sojourn truly has one of the most clutch ultimates in the game, and combined with her high-speed movement, it's not even held back by tank mitigation. It's just that good. 130 damage rails every second is scary stuff. Even just a single one during her neutral is enough to play more carefully. 2-tap potential every second makes her almost unstoppable, so it's definitely a top 2 damage ultimate, but it gets beaten out by Symmetra. Next up is Photon Barrier, which puts tank ultimates to shame. Without an EMP to delete it from the game, it's always going to make the fight hell for the enemy team. The cross-map shield gives you so much control over the fight. It blocks heals, damage, and lets your whole team play super aggressively. There are a few heroes that can shoot through shields, but they can't ever pass through to commit to the kills because of that heal blocking. The best thing to do is to wait it out, but a 12-second duration for that level of value is pretty much the best possible zoning advantage you can get. Damage heroes are doing well, but for the top of A tier, it's gotta be a support ultimate, and it goes to Ana's Nano Boost. It's got flexibility between saving and pushing hard. It's just such a good buff that it fits with so many heroes. It's the type of ultimate that really forces you to kite because of the overwhelming advantage. But it's also got a fast cast time, so it can also use the element of surprise. 50% damage reduction is also pretty much the best buff in the game, combined with how effective Ana's healing is at range. But now it's time for S tier, and it's the usual culprits. First is Lucio's Sound Barrier. It may be the most popular ultimate to cancel, but the instant burst of health makes it better than Transcendence for pushing aggressively, especially when countering another ultimate. It's good enough to counter 2 ultimates at once. And when used to just dry push and jump the enemy, it's also really hard to deal with. It really only gets outclassed by the unbelievably powerful Kitsune Rush. The best ultimate is still Kiriko's. It just does too much, man. The speed boost, the fire rate boost, the cooldown reduction, the reload speed increase, and all that on a massive area that pushes forward. It's the ideal ultimate, and it can only be cancelled by killing the Kiriko right as she tries to drop it. Even with one of the effects removed, it would still be a top tier ultimate, which really goes to show just how overtuned it is. And that's it for the ultimate tier list for Season 10. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.